临时起一档关于临床试验从业人员 B 面的播客。
我们相信，在严谨的 GCP 之外，生命还有更多元的打开方式。
聆听真实故事，收获或解勇气，点燃你心中的那份奇异。
Hi everyone, welcome to today's podcast, The Life of the Trial, and I'm your host, Kevin. Today we have very special guests from OCT company, Irina and Eugenia. Hi, Irina and Eugenia. Would you just say hi to our audience?
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to talk about OCT and clinical trials.
Yeah, welcome. And at the first, we'd like you have a brief introduction of yourself to let all the audience know who are you and what you are working for.
Hi, everyone. My name is Irina Petrova. I'm head of clinical operations at the contract research organization called OCT. And I'm in a company for almost 20 years now. I've got a degree in medical science, but joined the clinical trial industry almost 25 years ago. And most of my experience geographically relates to the clinical trials conducted in Eastern Europe. While our deep roots are in Central and Eastern Europe, OCT, a core part of our mission has been to act as a pioneer in a reliable bridge for pharmaceutical collaboration between China and Russian markets. What truly sets us apart is our proven track record in facilitating China-Russian pharmaceutical partnerships. We have successfully conducted numerous clinical trials and facilitated market access for leading Chinese manufacturers in Russia and in European Asian Union region, and have been the organizer of flagship events like, for example, Russia-China Pharmaceutical Cooperation Forums in Shanghai. So we've been conducted it maybe for the last several years in a row. And we don't just offer geography, we offer trusted access, regulatory navigation, and a platform for mutual growth in this significant critical markets.
Thank you, Irina.
Yes, of course, thank you. I'm Eugenia Radkova. I'm head of MedSci department at OCT, and our department is responsible for medical writing the study documents like clinical study protocol, informed consent form, investigators brochure, clinical study reports, and also CTD modules. And also our specialists are involved in the development of study design. We have a biostatistician in our team who is responsible for the sample size calculation and statistical aspects of the study. So we cover a very huge number of activities which involve both writing and also the development of scientific program of clinical studies.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Eugenia. We all know Russia is often prized for its large treatment-naive patient pools, and particularly in areas like oncology. For OCT's perspective, what are the top 3 defining characters of the clinical trial environment in Russia today and make it an attractive location for global sponsors? Maybe you can give us a concrete example of how this has accelerated a trial's timeline for one of your clients.
Yes, indeed. Russia has always been an active player on the market of clinical research. There are several factors which make Russia a very attractive country for pharmaceutical companies in many instances. If we talk about clinical research, first of all, I would like to explain a little bit about Russian regulatory environment, or to say it correctly, European Asian Union regulations, because the drug registration and drug development in these procedures, Russia follows European Asian Union regulations accepted mutually but by all member states of European Asian Union. So, European Asian Union in most part, European Asian Union regulations concerning clinical trials are harmonized with the world industry standards. And in some cases, for example, if we take clinical trial guidelines for different medicinal products, the regulations are just the direct translation from the relevant EMA guidance for industry. GCP, European Asian Union GCP, is not an exception. And I should say that currently we're using the second reduction of ICA GCP, and the third reduction is being discussed among the experts currently. And I hope that it will come into force in the foreseeable future. So we are on the same page with the rest of the world. This fact makes clinical trials data obtained in Russia acceptable worldwide. And this is confirmed by multiple successful cases of marketing authorizations using massive amount of data obtained from Russian patients from Russian market. Quite often we receive questions about suitability of a particular clinical trial designed for Russia. I mean, choice of endpoints, population, comparator, sample size assessment, or suitability of clinical trial data for marketing authorization in Russia. No questions, our company can provide the expert assessment, especially in difficult, not that obvious cases. But we can also recommend to take the relevant international guidelines as a reference, and you will be able to answer maybe not all, but most of the questions yourself. To complete the description of Russian regulatory environment, I would also like to mention that local particularities, which of course exist and of course should be considered. For example, a well-known requirement to present local study data in the registration drug dossier. It can be arranged either through a separate local study or, which in our opinion is a better time and budget saving scenario, through inclusion of Russia into the International Clinical Trial Program, MRCT. In other words, also clinical trial recommendations for a particular therapeutic areas, particular disease, and they can be found on the website of the Ministry of Health of Russia. This recommendation should also be considered, especially if you plan a local clinical study. Secondly, Russia is a big country with a population of 140 million of people. There are dozens of experienced, dedicated, and well-trained sites. There is a centralized healthcare system which really helps in recruiting of patients in certain therapeutic areas, and recruitment is really focused and easy. It would not be true if I say that we never experienced challenges with recruitment. For example, orphan or just rare indications are difficult to recruit because for a majority of orphan indications, there are no unified single database of patients, so we have to collect them literally at individual sites all over the country. Luckily, our experience let us manage such difficult cases efficiently, and exceptional, I would say, investigators' motivation helps us a lot in this. And the last of top 3 features, and probably the most important one, is the highest quality of the data provided by Russian sites and local service providers. Russian sites hosted regular FDA and EMA inspections of other regulatory authorities. For example, in one of our clinical trials, where OCT recruited more than 5,000 volunteers. It was a COVID-19 vaccine study in just, I think, 2 or 3 months. There was an inspection of Chinese regulator without any findings, and the drug was successfully marketed in China and was also approved by the World Health Organization.
Yeah, I think that's a good news. Based on my understanding, I know that your expertise spans not just Russia, but also Eastern Europe and the Eurasian Economic Union and also CIS countries. How integrated are these regulatory and patient recruitment environments, and what are the key advantages of using a pan-regional strategy with a CRO like OCT?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, Eastern European countries boast high recruitment potential. This is a well-known, worldwide known fact, especially when it comes to the countries with relatively big population. Though the country should not necessarily to be big to recruit well. For example, we had a very successful experience in ovarian cancer trial in Latvia. This is a relatively small Baltic states, where one of our top recruiting sites was located. So should say among other 60 sites. It became possible because investigators could organize efficient referral of patients from all over the country to their site. So the small size of the country was here rather an advantage than disadvantage. Nowadays, due to geopolitical issues, Eastern European countries are quite overloaded with the clinical trials, and the competition due to decreased activity of pharmaceutical companies for obvious reasons, decreased activities in Russia and Belarus and also in Ukraine. These are big countries for clinical trials. So the competition in the remaining countries is extremely high, which of course has a quite negative impact on recruitment speed. Also, we see that therapeutic options covered by insurance and thus available for patients for free in Eastern European countries are extending, which make clinical trials of, for example, generic products or biosimilars less attractive for patients. So Eastern European countries in this instance are becoming closer to the Western sites. Whereas for patients living in such countries as Russia, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, participation in clinical trials still remain a viable and rather attractive therapeutic option. Coming back to the second part of the question about integration of regulatory environment, Eastern European countries belonging to European Union have common clinical trial system. It's called CTIS, the abbreviation, which enables harmonized clinical trial application and approval process. So you don't need to do like the full submission in every country. Also unified safety reporting and many other features. In European Asian Union countries in this region, and please let me remind that it's Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan, the marketing authorization process is harmonized. In brief, you select a reference country, one country, any country of European Asian Union, and submit the full dossier in CTD format in this country. After getting marketing authorization in the reference country, you may submit the abbreviated dossier, local specific, country specific documents in other member states. The process is called recognition and can be done simultaneously in all other member states. On contrary, clinical trial application procedure is unique for every country in the European Asian Union, but I should say that the package of the document, the process and timelines are more or less similar. There are no dramatic differences between the countries. The fastest country is Russia. Clinical trial approval takes 31 business days. These are official timelines, and I can tell that Russian regulator really comply with these timelines. And the longest is Kazakhstan, up to 4 months. Belarus and Armenia is somewhere in between, about 2-3 months is needed to get clinical trial approved. Also, the positive thing is that European Asian Union countries share the expert approaches for evaluation of clinical trial data. So we can assure you that the results of the studies approved and conducted, for example, in Belarus, will be accepted by other member states. In a nutshell, altogether, the regions you mentioned in your question represent a powerful resource for quick patient recruitment and will give you good quality data at the possible fastest timelines and affordable cost.
Okay, yeah, thank you for letting us know that. Just for a sponsor whose just primary concern is the data quality and GCP compliance, just like you said, how does OCT company ensure that the data generated from your sites meets the international standards and is accepted by the major regulatory agency like the FDA or EMA?
Yes, you're right. And this is our primary concern as well, data quality, data integrity, and subject rights. And OCD has a well-established quality management system, which includes GCP-based standard operating procedures covered every single internal process. We conduct regular internal and external trainings for our personnel. We do regular assessment of employee performance. We do a lot of in-house and on-site audits. These are both system audits and project-specific audits, as well as qualification audits of our service providers, vendors. We are very proud of our QMS, and with great pleasure we host qualification audits from our clients, and we have maybe more than 100 system audits that we hosted. Due to low turnover rate in clinical department, in my department, for the last few years, it's not more than 10%. OCD clinical team can be considered as a team of loyal, dedicated, experienced, and qualified professionals. Project teams remain stable for the whole duration of the study, which significantly decreases the risk of mistakes and deviations introduced by the newcomers. To manage the project, OCT use state-of-the-art CTMS system, clinical trial management system, fine-tunes for OCT processes, fully validated and compliant with CFR Part 11. Also, we use electronic TMF, and for this year, for the forthcoming year, we have ambitious plans for introduction of electronic investigator site file to the sites, and we hope we will do it in the nearest future. We see that sites in Russia are not only so are ready for that. In data monitoring, we actively utilize risk-based approaches as required by the most recent reduction of ICA GCP, and conduct regular trainings for our CRAs focused on best monitoring practices and intended to improve CRAs' performance on site. As I have already mentioned, the sites in Russia are quite experienced, and some of them were inspected by foreign regulatory authorities, EMA, FDA, and others. Unlike in other countries, Russian principal investigators are very much involved in the process of clinical trials, so this is not just a formal figure putting signatures. They're present at monitoring visits. They personally control every site team member, and sometimes they even maintain source records and complete CRF. I don't know in which other country you can see this. The interest and motivation of the sites I would define as outstanding. The sites are competing for trials and thus doing their best in terms of the quality of the data, protocol compliance, recruiting, timelines for completing of various tasks, for example, data entry or query resolution, and communication with CROs. In most cases, very smooth and seamless. OCT also has own data management department and own EDC system, which is well familiar to CRAs and sites and makes it convenient for use. The data management team is very supportive to clinical team. So they attend project calls, and their valuable feedback on the quality of the data collection is extremely useful. It helps to avoid repeating queries and prevent other data issues, which results in shorter timelines in the end for data cleaning and database lock and better data quality.
Yeah, that sounds great to have clinical trials in Russia and the CIS areas. Well, for pharmaceutical or biotech companies, when they're just going to consider to have a clinical research in Russia or the border CIS region for the first time, what do you think is the single most important piece of the advice to ensure their trial to be a success?
That's a very interesting question. And in my opinion, before you go to a certain region, it's essential to collect the basic information about legislation and the clinical trial infrastructure available to ensure that your goals and expectations will be met and you will not be disappointed. To give more information about European Asian Union and Russia in particular, OCT conducts free educational webinars on the topics of clinical trials, or marketing authorization, study design, and other. Please follow our LinkedIn and WeChat group, where we post announcements about events and webinars for Chinese audience. Global CROs are now not very active in Russia, and not so many local CROs have the size and experience of our company, of OCT, possess developed QMS system and have extensive experience in MR cities, let alone experience with FDA and EMA inspections. That is why when selecting a local service provider, please pay attention to the age of the company, how long it's on the market. Over the last couple of years, a lot of tiny CROs appeared in Russia to do mostly bioequivalent studies, having zero experience in well-controlled clinical trials. So what is also important is company's reputation, size, and experience of its employees, complexity of the trials they perform, and how detailed and complete their commercial proposal is. Don't choose by the costs. Implement complex approach, organize bid defense meetings, make vendor assessment, and in the end, I would say you are selecting a partner for several years, because clinical trials are really long projects sometimes. The partner who you can trust, as if you do this clinical trial yourself, keep in mind that they will be your eyes and ears in the country.
Just first, as the head of the MedSci consulting, you help just a lot of sponsors optimize their trial design for regional success. We'd like to see if you could walk us through how you adapt the global studies protocols to the specific patient profile and the clinical practice in Russia and also in the CIS, while just maintaining the scientific rigor and also international acceptability.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to emphasize that OCT is an international CRO with long-term experience across multiple therapeutic areas, including large international multi-center trials. So when we work with sponsors on multi-regional studies or MRCT, one of the mandatory elements of our approach is feasibility assessment for Russia and other EAEU countries or countries of the Eurasian Economic Union. And this assessment is conducted by our clinical department with active involvement from MedSci team, which I present here. What does this feasibility work include? First, we analyze local clinical guidelines and standards of care. We communicate with key opinion leaders and we contact investigational sites directly to understand their real-world experience, in particular how feasible the inclusion and exclusion criteria are, and which parts of the protocol may raise concerns in routine practice. Also, the OCT team carefully analyzes regional patient profiles. In some therapeutic areas, patients may be diagnosed at later stages, may have different comorbidity patterns, or a different history of prior therapies compared to China or Europe or the US. And these factors we see can significantly influence recruitment dynamics, endpoint sensitivity, and even safety interpretation. We also assess whether the eligibility criteria reflect how patients are actually treated, whether the chosen comparator aligns with local standards of care, and whether certain assessments are really realistic in routine settings without compromising data quality. And all of this information is carefully summarized then and discussed with the sponsor to assess how applicable the protocol is in Russia and the EAEU region. And what we see based on our experience that several scenarios are further possible. In some cases, the protocol does not require any changes at all. In others, certain eligibility criteria or procedures may need clarification or minor adaptation for Russia or other EAEU countries. Importantly, any such adjustments are always evaluated very carefully, with a strong focus on preserving data integrity and ensuring that the results remain suitable for regulatory submissions. So we are very focused on that, and changes, if needed, are very targeted and well balanced. I can say that there have also been situations where feasibility assessments showed that the protocol could not be realistically implemented in our region, most often due to a high risk of slow recruitment driven by local clinical practice or diagnostic pathways. In those cases, we are very transparent with sponsor and communicate these risks openly at very early stages. So we really believe that our approach reduces risks, supports timely recruitment, and strengthens the overall value of the study data. So this is my answer.
Oh, much appreciate, Eugenia. Yeah, it's quite a lot of things could help our sponsor to just accelerate their trials and to make it just quite suitable for just depend on the countries. Yeah, that's really helpful. Just the second questions, when finalizing a study protocol mission to the Russian Ministry of Health, what are most critical and perhaps unique local requirements that sponsor from China of overlook? This code just related to the specific procedures, comparator drug, control groups, or even with certain endpoints need to be defined or just collected differently to meet the local expectation. Would you just discuss a bit about the local requirements of the Russia? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Based on our experience working with Chinese sponsors, there are a few aspects of study design that almost always require particularly detailed discussion before submission to the Russian Ministry of Health. First of all, the Russian regulator places very strong emphasis on the scientific justification of the study design, and in particular on the rationale for the sample size. Sponsors are expected to clearly explain why a specific primary endpoint was chosen, what treatment effect is anticipated, and most importantly, why this difference is considered clinically meaningful. In addition, regulators look closely at whether the study hypothesis aligns with EAEU regulatory guidelines and whether it is also consistent with international standards, such as those applied by the FDA and EMA. And from practical standpoint, we strongly recommend including accurate references to relevant regulatory guidelines and key literature sources in the protocol. Also, regulators expect the comparator to be clinically relevant and realistically available to patients. It's also important to be aware that within the EAEU there is an official list of recommended comparator products for certain categories of medicines, and these recommendations are issued by the Special Expert Committee of the Eurasian Economic Union. And therefore, before submitting a study for regulatory review, sponsors should always check whether the investigational product falls under this list and whether the selected reference product fully complies with this recommendation. And this point is very, very particularly critical for bioequivalent studies, and we recommend to study these recommendations of the expert committee or of the Eurasian Economic Union. Another area that often requires extra attention is preclinical data. The Russian regulator carefully evaluates whether the available preclinical package is sufficient to support the proposed clinical trial. Before submitting the investigator's brochure, it's critical to double-check that all relevant preclinical studies are fully described and that there was a clear scientific justification for any studies that are recommended by guidelines but were not conducted. This is very important, we see from the practice. It is also important to understand that EAEU regulations have evolved significantly over the past decade, with the goal of aligning as closely as possible with international, especially European, regulatory approaches. As a result, IFA sponsors preclinical and clinical development program already follows these international standards. Major local adaptations are usually not required. Everything usually is okay or just needs some very small corrections. And we always say that this regulatory predictability is one of the reasons why Russia and the EAEU remain attractive regions for global clinical development. Sponsors generally have a clear understanding of what the regulator expects and how scientific dialogue will be structured during the review process. So we recommend to take attention to this advantage of our region.
Yes, thanks, Eugenia. Just you have just point the several really key points for the practical design, and I think just all of the people who just listen to our podcast, you should just take care of that. We're just going to want just to launch a new clinical study in Russia. Yeah, that's helpful. And then I also your team developed the key documents like the protocols, informed consent forms, and clinical study reports. Beyond the protocol itself, what are the main challenges in aligning these documents? Especially, we believe the informed consent form because just of the strict Russian regulatory and the ethical committee requirements and international standards. Yes, there's a lot of things we need to think about. And how do you just navigate the difference in formatting and mandatory wording or the level of the detail required?
So, as we have already mentioned, regulatory requirements in Russia and across the EAEU are largely harmonized with international standards. That said, there are still a number of local nuances that need to be carefully considered when preparing key study documents. You are absolutely right. So one of the most sensitive areas is the informed consent form. In Russia, the Ministry of Health has issued a specific checklist that clearly defines what information must be included in the informed consent. While the overall approach is aligned with GCP and international ethical principles, every item from this checklist must be reflected in the document, and this is very important. For example, the informed consent must clearly state whether any biosamples will be sent to laboratories outside of Russia and whether personal data will be processed or analyzed outside the country. It is also mandatory to reference the specific Russian regulated document that guarantees insurance coverage for study participants. This is a government decree, as well as to cite the law that regulates the confidentiality and protection of personal data. When speaking about clinical study reports, the structural requirements are generally consistent with ICH E3. However, in recent years, additional formatting rules have been introduced. The main body of the report and all appendices must be compiled into a single document with continuous page numbering. So this is quite specific requirement of the local regulatory authorities, but we have what we have. So for bioequivalence studies in particular, regulators expect the appendices will include validation reports, analytical reports, temperature logs, and certificates of analysis for investigational product batches. In addition, the report must clearly specify the start and end dates of both laboratory sample analysis and statistical analysis. I can say that our team is very familiar with these and other local requirements, and we proactively flag such nuances to our partners early on. And this helps avoid delays during review and ensures that all study documents meet both local regulatory expectations and international standards. So this is how it goes.
Yeah, thank you, Eugenia. Yeah, we know this much about the informed consent and what the things just go in the Russia, and I think just it's quite the complex thing. So we'd better to just consult the your team first if we are going to have any research in Russia or CIS. Yeah, it could be better. And also, we have a question just with your experience across all trial phase, what unique considerations should sponsors keep in mind when just planning early phase or complex interventional trials in this region? Could you just share an example where the scientific or methodological input during the planning stage significantly de-risked or just accelerate such a trial?
So when sponsors are planning early phase or more complex interventional trials in the EAEU region, one of the first things we always advise them to clarify is where exactly each part of the study can be conducted. There are some very specific local rules that can have a major impact on trial strategy if they're discovered too late. A key example for early phase development is phase 1 studies. In Russia, there is a regulatory restriction that prohibits conducting phase 1 trials in healthy volunteers for drugs that are manufactured outside the country. This rule applies specifically to Russia and does not extend to other EAEU countries such as Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, or Kyrgyzstan. In other words, in these countries, phase 1 studies could be planned. For Russia, a possible solution could be localization of manufacturing process in Russia, even partly, but these must be properly documented and confirmed at the time of clinical trial application submission. More broadly, sponsors should keep in mind that for registration in the EAEU, including Russia, local clinical data are required. This means that our region must either be included in a global multi-country study, or the clinical trial must be fully conducted within the Eurasian Economic Union. And choosing the right development strategy here is really a strategic decision for the sponsor usually. For example, we see a particularly strong interest from Chinese pharmaceutical companies in bringing biosimilars to the market of the Eurasian Economic Union. If the company is planning a PK equivalent study in healthy volunteers and the product is fully manufactured in China, this study cannot be conducted in Russia. However, we have successfully organized and conducted such studies in the Republic of Belarus, for example, and in these ways, sponsors can still generate the required local data. When we talk about more complex studies, vaccine trials, another good example from Russian-Chinese collaboration, In one project, early scientific review showed that the originally planned dosing schedule did not fully align with the Russian national vaccination calendar, and as a result, the study required an increased number of doses. And because this issue was identified at the planning stage, the protocol was updated upfront with the necessary scientific justification and data package. And this proactive approach significantly de-risked the project and ultimately allowed for fast regulatory approval and study start in Russia. So overall, our experience shows that early scientific and methodological input, especially around local regulatory and clinical practice nuances, is often the key factor that turns a project into a successful one.
Okay, thank you, Eugene. And yeah, that's a good point, and shows lots of the obstacles which may just affect the study in early phase to be conducted in the Russia or the CIS countries. That's a good point. Just keep in mind if you want to have the early phase. Okay, we know that your role also includes providing scientific guidance throughout trial conduct. In what scenarios do sponsors typically engage your team for urgent medical or the methodological advice middle study, such as the handling protocol deviation, amending the inclusion criteria, and how does your intervention helps keep the trials on track without just compromising quality or local compliance?
You correctly noted the most frequent questions. Indeed, they often relate to the adjustments of eligibility criteria. And here it is important to maintain a balance in achieving the optimal rate of recruitment and observing their scientific and regulatory value of research results in the future. And such questions require an assessment of how the modification of a particular criterion will affect the efficacy profile of the drug, which requires a study of the literature and a guidance on the relevant topic, and our specialists work a lot with these. As for protocol deviations, our department is usually involved in this topic from the very beginning of the study. We participate in reviewing the list of protocol deviation categories for each project and categorizing these groups as minor or major deviations. In the event of a deviation in the particular investigational site, colleagues may seek our opinion on the significance of the deviation for the results of the study, the assessment of efficacy and safety, and ask for opinions on additional possible measures to prevent their recurrence. We see that sponsors also engage us when they receive questions or comments from local regulators or ethics committees during the trial approval process. And our role is to translate these comments into scientific or methodological actions and to help prepare well-reasoned responses that keep the study moving forward without unnecessary amendments. So this is in a brief summary of how we can be involved.
Oh, yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this question. And we also have the last question related to the regulatory agility. The regulatory environment globally is always evolving. And how would you describe the current agility and predictability of the Russia regulatory process for the clinical trials approvals? What is the typical timeline for the application to approval? And that's question just many people just really curious about and interested in. So yeah, thank you, just Eugenia. Would you just let us know more about the application process in the Russia and CIS countries?
Yes, that's right. This is one of the top questions we usually receive. So one point that's really worth highlighting is that clear, predictable, and relatively fast approval process is actually one of the strong advantages of Russia as a country for clinical trials. From a timing perspective, the regulatory review period is very well defined. The full approval process takes 31 business days, and in practice, this timeline is followed very strictly. From our experience, we haven't seen cases where the official approval timelines were exceeded. On the contrary, approvals are often granted even earlier than this deadline. So the review itself is conducted by two independent bodies. First, the Ethics Council under the Ministry of Health, which assess compliance with ethical requirements and patient protection. And in parallel, a scientific expert institution evaluates the study design, the protocol, and the overall clinical development rationale. And based on these two reviews, the Ministry of Health then issues the final decision to the sponsor. In terms of documentation, the submission package is quite comprehensive, but also very transparent. It includes the study protocol, investigator's brochure, informed consent form, delegation letter, local insurance documentation, certificates of analysis for study drug, also GMP certification or other proof of manufacturing quality, investigator CVs, and the list of investigational sites. And the state fee for clinical trial approval review process is approximately 20,000 Chinese yuan. If the regulator requests some clarifications or corrections to the submitted documents, sponsors are given up to 90 working days to respond. I can say that in reality, this is more than sufficient time to discuss proposed changes with the sponsor, to update the documentation, and conduct the resubmission. Additional review of responses to the request will add no more than 1 month to the total timelines of regulatory approval process. Overall, so this combination of fixed timelines, transparent requirements, and consistent regulatory behavior makes the Russian approval process both agile and highly predictable. That's why I will repeat again and again that we regularly encourage our partners from different regions to consider Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union more broadly for both MRCT and local registration of clinical trials.
Okay, thank you, Eugenia. That's quite critical to all of the sponsors. Yeah, today we just we want to say thanks again to Eugenia to join our podcast Try of Life. And I think she has just answered most of the questions we may just curious about the clinical research in Russia. And I believe the LCT company could be the best choice for you if you want to just launch a clinical research in the Russia or the CIS countries there. Okay, yeah, finally, where can our listeners to go to learn about the OCT company and its service? Because just like your side said, the lots of people they may have the interesting to going to have the clinical trials in Russia or the area nearby, and can you give some advice on how to have access to you?
Yeah, sure. For a complete overview of what our company looks like, I would direct everyone to our website at oct-0.com. To specifically understand our work in building China-Russian bridge, I encourage you to look for our case studies with the companies like Krigbaya, Consigna, and others. A new section which details our forums and project successes. Please also connect with us on LinkedIn and official WeChat account. Search for OCT CRO, where we share insights relevant to international expansion. Furthermore, we have a WeChat discussion group dedicated to drug registration and clinical research in Russia, and not only, but in the entire European Asian Economic Union, where you can get exclusive insight from market experts, including Ministry of Health experts. To apply for the membership, reach out to our team at pr@oct-0.com. You can reach out through our website Contact Us page, and we welcome direct inquiries in Mandarin language. Our team, including those who have worked closely with our China-focused initiative, is ready to discuss how we can support you to enter Russian market and access to clinical trial sites, and discuss with you the possible strategies for Russia and Eastern Europe. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for Irina to join us today. Let all of us have a better understanding of the clinical trials in the OCT company in the Russia and also the Eurasian economical countries and also in the CIS countries. Now, do not hesitate to just contact the OCT if you have any plan to just expand your clinical research in this area. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's all for this podcast. Yeah, bye. See you next time. Next time. Next time. Next time.